Imagine Alberta, Canada, a vast, untamed landscape stretching beneath the endless northern sky. Here, the land is shaped by ancient glaciers and windswept prairies, a place where the horizon seems to go on forever. But hidden beneath this rugged beauty lies a treasure more coveted than gold. Oil, a resource that has transformed not just the province, but the entire nation. Deep beneath the dense boreal forests, the Canadian oil sands form one of the world's largest petroleum reserves. These vast deposits are a testament to the power of time and geology, created over millions of years from ancient plants and animals compressed by the weight of the earth. Here, colossal machines claw at the earth, extracting a thick, black substance, bitumen, often called buried sunshine. This material, trapped for eons, is the fossilized energy of prehistoric sunlight, now unearthed to fuel our modern world. From above, the mining sites appear as sprawling, intricate patterns carved into the landscape, vast scars that reveal the scale of human ambition and ingenuity. Trucks the size of houses rumble across these sites, hauling oil-soaked sand day and night. Each load begins a journey that will eventually power vehicles, factories, and homes thousands of kilometers away. This immense resource has propelled Canada into the ranks of the world's top oil producers, shaping its economy, creating jobs, and influencing its role on the global stage. Yet the story of Alberta's oil is not just one of prosperity. It is also a tale of paradox and challenge, where the promise of wealth is shadowed by environmental concerns and difficult choices. From these remote northern fields, a river of crude oil begins its journey, not across the breadth of Canada, but almost entirely south, flowing through a vast network of pipelines. It crosses the border into the United States, leaving its homeland in a raw, unrefined form, destined for refineries far from where it was born. But why does a nation so rich in oil export so much of it, only to buy back gasoline and other refined products at a premium? This question lies at the heart of Canada's energy paradox. The answer is woven through a complex web of history, economics, and geography, shaped by decades of policy decisions, market forces, and the sheer scale of the land itself. This is the central mystery of Canada's oil story, a story of buried sunshine, ambition, and the choices that shape a nation's future. Canada is an oil giant, blessed with some of the world's largest reserves. Beneath the vast prairies and forests, immense quantities of crude oil lie waiting to be tapped. Alberta, in particular, is home to the oil sands, one of the most significant petroleum deposits on the planet. Yet, despite this abundance, Canada is a minor player in refining. The country's refineries are relatively few and often smaller than those found in major oil-producing nations. Every day, millions of barrels are extracted, mostly from Alberta's oil sands. The scale of these operations is staggering, with enormous trucks and machines working around the clock to move bitumen from the earth. But instead of refining most of this oil at home, Canada exports the vast majority of its crude, mainly to the United States, where a sprawling network of pipelines, trains, and trucks carries it south. Over 95% of Canada's exported oil flows south, feeding a deeply integrated energy system that links the two countries. These pipelines are the arteries of North America's oil trade. In 2024, the U.S. imported about 4.1 million barrels per day from Canada, over 60% of its foreign oil. This makes Canada by far America's largest and most reliable supplier. Canada is America's top supplier, but this creates a mutual dependency. The economies and energy security of both nations are tightly intertwined, for better or worse. Canada relies on the U.S. as its primary customer, exporting not just oil, but also jobs and profits that come from refining and processing. Refining is where the real value lies, turning crude into gasoline, diesel, and other products. Yet Canada sends away its raw resource, missing out on much of this added value. The question persists: why can't Canada refine its own destiny? Why does such a resource-rich nation send so much of its wealth abroad? This debate echoes in politics and economics across the country, sparking passionate arguments about jobs, sovereignty, and the future of Canadian energy. The answer is rooted in a complex mix of infrastructure, economics, and history. A story that continues to shape Canada's role in the global energy landscape. Not all oil is equal. Beneath the surface of the earth, oil comes in many forms, each with its own unique characteristics and challenges. Some oils are light and flow easily, while others are thick, sticky, and stubborn, almost like molasses. Saudi or Texas oil is light and sweet, easy and cheap to refine. These oils are prized by refiners because they contain fewer impurities and can be turned into gasoline and diesel with minimal effort. Canada's oil sands produce heavy, sour crude, thick as tar, high in sulfur. This oil is so dense that it barely flows at room temperature, and its high sulfur content means it needs extra processing to remove pollutants. It must be diluted with lighter hydrocarbons or heated just to move through pipelines. Transporting heavy crude is a logistical challenge, requiring special equipment and added costs every step of the way. This makes Canadian crude harder to process and less valuable than lighter oils. Refineries must invest more time, energy, and money to turn it into usable fuels, which affects its market price. The price difference, or differential, reflects the extra cost for refiners. This gap can fluctuate with global demand, refinery capacity, and transportation bottlenecks, impacting profits for producers and refiners alike. Refineries built for light crude can't handle heavy crude without major upgrades. Many older refineries simply aren't equipped to process such dense, sulfur-rich oil, limiting where heavy crude can be refined. Canada's oil must find refineries equipped for its unique properties. Only a handful of facilities in North America have invested in the technology needed to handle this challenging resource. That's why its journey south isn't just convenient, it's necessary. The U.S. Gulf Coast, with its complex refineries, has become the primary destination for Canadian heavy crude. U.S. refineries have invested billions to process this challenging oil. These upgrades allow them to turn what was once considered a low-value resource into valuable fuels and products. The path of least resistance leads Canadian crude to where it's wanted and can be handled. This journey is shaped by economics, infrastructure, and the very nature of the oil itself. The nature of the oil shapes its entire journey, from the depths of the earth to the refineries that transform it into the fuels that power our world. Canada's heavy oil needs a dedicated transportation system. Over decades, Canada and the U.S. built a vast pipeline network, the iron arteries of North American energy. Pipelines like Enbridge Mainline and Keystone move millions of barrels daily from Alberta to the U.S. Midwest. This infrastructure wasn't accidental, it was a strategic link between supply and demand. Once pipelines are in place, they create powerful incentives to keep oil flowing south. The system is efficient, reliable, and deeply entrenched. Any new Canadian refinery must compete with this established, cost-effective route. The path dependency is strong. Oil follows the pipelines. The status quo is reinforced by decades of investment. For Canadian producers, the southern route remains the logical, profitable choice. The U.S. refining industry is perfectly matched to Canada's heavy crude. As domestic heavy oil declined, U.S. refineries invested billions in technology to process Canadian oil. These advanced refineries thrive on heavy, sour crude, turning it into high-value products. Canadian oil is a discounted feedstock, making it attractive for U.S. refiners. In 2024, Canadian crude made up nearly 3/4 of oil processed in the U.S. Midwest. The infrastructure, scale, and technology are already in place. For Canadian producers, selling to these refineries is far more economical than building new ones at home. Even political tensions can't break this bond. U.S. refineries need Canadian oil. Alternatives are costly and less reliable. Economics and engineering have forged a resilient, mutually beneficial relationship. Building a new refinery in Canada sounds simple, but it's a massive challenge. A modern heavy crude refinery costs tens of billions, an investment few are willing to risk. Canada's strict environmental regulations mean years of assessments and legal hurdles. The domestic market is small. A new refinery would need to export, competing with established U.S. giants. Older U.S. refineries, fully paid off, have a major cost advantage. New Canadian refineries would struggle to compete on price and scale. The financial and regulatory barriers are daunting. Most proposals never get off the ground. The dream of a robust Canadian refining sector remains elusive. The status quo persists because the alternatives are so costly. Instead of expanding, Canada's refining capacity has shrunk. Most refineries are old, built for smaller regional markets. Several have closed or become storage terminals, unable to compete with larger U.S. facilities. Oil production has soared, but refining hasn't kept pace. Some provinces have no refineries at all, relying on imports for gasoline and heating oil. Aging infrastructure and lack of investment leave Canada vulnerable to supply disruptions. The economic logic often favors shutting down old refineries rather than upgrading them. Canada has tried to diversify, most notably with the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion in 2024. TMX was meant to open Asian markets and reduce U.S. dependency, yet even after completion, 95% of Canada's oil exports still flow south. The U.S. remains the closest, most reliable customer, with specialized refineries ready for Canadian crude. Shipping oil to Asia is riskier and more complex. The price gap between Canadian and U.S. oil has narrowed, making the U.S. market even more attractive. Canada's economic fate remains tied to U.S. policies and demand. New pipelines offer hope for diversification, but haven't changed the core reality. The North American energy map is deeply entrenched. True market independence remains elusive. The tides of history and economics still pull Canada's oil south. In 2026, Canada stands at an energy crossroads. It's a global resource powerhouse, but its future is bound to U.S. decisions and demand. Canada produces the raw material, but relies on its neighbor to turn it into finished goods. This dependency shapes its economy and politics, leaving it vulnerable to external shifts. The dream of energy independence is about control, not just supply. New export infrastructure and a global energy transition could reshape the landscape, but barriers remain high. For now, the path of least resistance is south, through established pipelines. Canada's story is a lesson in the complexities of global energy. Its future depends on whether it can build a more independent path, or remain a land of buried sunshine, forever flowing south. Canada's limited refinery capacity isn't just a domestic challenge, it sends ripples across the global energy market. When a major oil-producing nation can't process most of its own crude, the effects are felt far beyond its borders. With the majority of Canadian heavy crude exported as raw material, primarily to the United States, an imbalance emerges on the world stage. U.S. refineries, specially equipped to handle heavy oil, benefit from a steady supply at discounted rates. This keeps American fuel prices more stable, but it also means that global oil prices can be distorted. When Canadian crude is sold at a discount, known as the Western Canadian Select Differential, it puts downward pressure on global heavy oil prices. Refineries in Europe, Asia, and Latin America often find themselves competing for more expensive sources, while U.S. refiners enjoy a competitive edge. This dynamic shapes international trade relationships, sometimes straining Canada's negotiations with other countries seeking direct access to its resources. The lack of Canadian refining capacity also limits its ability to respond to global supply shocks. When geopolitical events disrupt oil flows from other regions, Canada's ability to step in with refined products is hampered. This can lead to increased volatility in international markets, as countries scramble to secure supplies from elsewhere. Canada's dependence on U.S. refineries deepens economic ties but also exposes both nations to shared risks. Pipeline disruptions, changes in trade policy, or shifts in environmental regulations can send shockwaves across North America and beyond. Meanwhile, countries like China and India, eager for secure energy sources, must look elsewhere, missing out on potential Canadian partnerships. In a world increasingly focused on energy security and diversification, Canada's limited refinery infrastructure becomes a global concern. Expanding domestic refining could allow Canada to capture more value, strengthen its negotiating power, and provide a stabilizing force in world markets. But until then, the world must adjust to a reality where one of the planet's largest oil producers remains, in many ways, a supplier of unfinished dreams. As the world looks to Canada for energy solutions, the story of its limited refining capacity is deeply intertwined with government policy and environmental regulation. Canadian energy policy has long walked a tightrope, balancing economic growth, environmental stewardship, and the shifting demands of a global marketplace. Federal and provincial governments play pivotal roles in shaping the oil landscape. Over the decades, regulatory frameworks have evolved, reflecting changing priorities. In the 1970s and 80s, Canada saw a wave of new refinery construction, spurred by energy security concerns. But as environmental awareness grew, so did the complexity of regulations. Today, any proposal for a new refinery faces a labyrinth of approval processes, environmental impact assessments, public consultations, and compliance with both provincial and federal emission standards. Take, for example, the fate of the proposed Kitimat Clean Refinery in British Columbia. Touted as a state-of-the-art facility designed to process Alberta bitumen with lower emissions, the project faced fierce opposition from environmental groups and Indigenous communities concerned about local ecosystems and climate impacts. After years of planning, delays, and mounting costs, the project stalled, emblematic of the broader national debate. Expert opinions are divided. Dr. Emily Tran, an energy policy analyst, notes, Canada's regulatory environment, while essential for protecting our land and water, can sometimes discourage investment in large-scale infrastructure. The uncertainty and extended timelines make it difficult for new refineries to get off the ground. Yet supporters argue these safeguards are necessary. The oil sands, after all, are among the world's most carbon-intensive sources of crude. Stringent regulations, like Alberta's carbon pricing and Canada's Clean Fuel Standard, aim to limit environmental damage. These policies drive innovation, pushing companies to develop cleaner technologies, but they also raise costs and complicate expansion plans. Meanwhile, Indigenous rights and land claims add another layer of complexity. Many proposed projects cross traditional territories, requiring meaningful consultation and, ideally, partnership with First Nations. Some communities see economic opportunity in refinery development, while others fear irreversible harm to their lands and ways of life. Government incentives have tried to tip the scales. Tax breaks, loan guarantees, and funding for cleaner technologies have been offered, but they rarely offset the high risk and capital outlay required. In recent years, the federal government has signaled a shift towards supporting value-added industries, but the pace of change remains slow. Environmental advocates, like Sierra Club's David Patel, insist the future lies not in more refineries, but in transitioning away from fossil fuels altogether. Canada should invest in renewable energy and retraining workers, rather than doubling down on an industry with a shrinking global market, he says. The result? A policy landscape marked by competing interests and political pressures. In Alberta, calls for energy independence and jobs clash with national climate commitments and international expectations. Each new proposal becomes a flashpoint in a larger conversation about Canada's identity, priorities, and responsibilities. Ultimately, the future of Canadian refining will be shaped as much by politics and public opinion as by markets and technology. The choices made today, about regulation, investment, and reconciliation, will determine whether Canada remains a supplier of unfinished dreams, or becomes a leader in responsible, value-added energy production. As Canada stands at this crossroads, one thing is clear. The path forward will require compromise, innovation, and a willingness to imagine a new role in the world's energy story. What comes next for Canada's refining industry? The answer may lie not just in policy or pipelines, but in a wave of technological innovation and a rapidly evolving global energy landscape. Across the world, oil refineries are being pushed to reinvent themselves. The forces driving this change are powerful: climate commitments, shifting consumer demand, and breakthroughs in science and engineering. For Canada, these trends present both challenges and unprecedented opportunities. Imagine a refinery of the future, one not defined solely by smokestacks and storage tanks, but by smart systems, green energy, and circular economies. Canadian companies and researchers are already exploring ways to lower emissions and make better use of every barrel. Carbon capture and storage, once seen as science fiction, is now being piloted at facilities in Alberta and Saskatchewan. These projects trap CO2 before it escapes into the atmosphere, storing it deep underground, or using it to create new products like building materials or synthetic fuels. But innovation doesn't stop there. Some refineries are experimenting with co-processing, blending bio-based feedstocks such as canola oil or forestry byproducts with traditional crude. This approach reduces the carbon intensity of fuels and opens new markets for Canadian agriculture and forestry. Meanwhile, advances in hydrogen production promise cleaner refining processes and even new export opportunities, as countries like Japan and Germany look to secure low-carbon hydrogen supplies. The integration of renewable energy is also on the horizon. Solar panels and wind turbines could power parts of refinery operations, reducing reliance on fossil fuels and shrinking the industry's carbon footprint. Digital technologies, artificial intelligence, automation, and blockchain are making refineries more efficient, safer, and responsive to market changes. predictive analytics can anticipate equipment failures, optimize energy use, and minimize waste. Globally, the energy transition is accelerating. Major economies are pledging to phase out gasoline and diesel vehicles, invest in electric mobility, and ramp up renewable power. In this new reality, demand for some petroleum products may decline, but the need for petrochemicals, used in everything from medical devices to renewable energy infrastructure, could remain strong. Canadian refineries may find future growth in producing specialty products, advanced biofuels, or even recycled plastics. Scenario planning is underway across the industry. One future sees Canada's refineries shrinking in number but growing in sophistication, smaller, cleaner, and tightly integrated with local industries and communities. Another envisions a pivot toward clean energy hubs, where refineries become centers for green hydrogen, eco-friendly chemicals, and sustainable fuels. Yet another scenario imagines a managed wind-down, with investments shifted into retraining workers and building renewable energy infrastructure. Whatever the path, collaboration will be key. Industry, government, indigenous communities, and innovators must work together to design solutions that are economically viable, environmentally responsible, and socially inclusive. The choices made now will shape Canada's place in the global energy system for decades to come. The story of Canadian refining is far from over. With bold thinking and shared resolve, the next chapter could be one of transformation, where Canada not only adapts to a changing world, but helps lead the way toward a cleaner, more sustainable energy future.